squint at you for that. I do, and a bit of lighting just to add to the. Yeah, my eyes are literally going to water when I answer questions from you, Katie. So I might just pan my eyes away given the backdrop. But yeah, far away.
On vaccine mandates, how worried are you that once the government reduces its mandates, that employers will start facing legal challenges and problems with failing?
And this is where we do have a role to play in providing guidance and advice, as we have done from the very beginning. MB are currently ensuring that we have that updated advice. It may well be that businesses will just need to conduct another health and safety assessment, as those were the basis, obviously, for the mandates that many put in place.
Do you think many will want to keep them?
Look, hard for me to know. You've already seen that in recent times, actually, some workplaces have already made adjustments based on the signalling that we were sending as government around the changes we were likely to make. But you can see that there are some grounds still, some circumstances where, of course, we believe for us they've been justified, and look, employers may go through their own process.
And for schools in each CE, there are parents and teachers and others who are worried about those mandates going forward. Do you think that's a legitimate concern?
Look, I absolutely understand that parents just want to make sure that their kids are safe and well, and I completely understand that. That's why we've been really careful to make sure we've gone to our experts and asked them the question of where mandates need and should apply to, and they came back with very clear direction. Their view was that they could be lifted from those areas, keeping in mind there are already very, very high vaccination rates across the education sector. Yeah, I'll come back to you then again. Yeah. Yeah, no, it was just more the individual employment arrangements with schools. I will still waiting to get just specifically on schools, but one thing to say across government agencies, there will be some situations where staff will have been stood down. There will be others where perhaps they have been replaced. So in some circumstances, it will be different depending on those workplaces and workforces. Yeah, and look, keep in mind, of course, that this doesn't require an instant reaction from those workplaces. Again, this is advice that we're wanting to make sure that is prepared in a really timely way. We'll look to get that out there as soon as possible. It may well have already been provided, but it's not that instantly any business needs to switch off the way that they've been operating. There's a range of issues that we have to take into account. The public health advice is key, because then so much of the legal advice then stands or falls on the public health advice. So that's the primary consideration. We have to make sure that there's a strong rationale for their use, and then legal advice often sits behind that. Oh, well, actually the public health advice that you can see, that's what we followed, and of course if there's justification from a health perspective to have them in place, then that means that that's the legal advice often supports that. Yeah. So that'll be their judgment. I mean, one of the things that I have observed over the last several months, when people have referred to the mandates, often they have been put in place in workplaces rather than ones that government themselves have driven. So ours have always been relatively narrow. It's been based on where we've seen vulnerabilities in the communities being served, or in the case of corrections, an environment that's particularly problematic, or in the case of the border, you're at the front line of potential new variants. And so each workplace will have its own specific circumstances. So it's not for me to make those judgments as to whether or not those workplaces are places where they'll continue or not, but we'll continue to make sure that we're just updating the advice that we provide. I think I'd say regardless of whether or not a workplace keeps a mandate in or not, we would want that to happen. You know, I think everyone has seen that there's been a cost to the restrictions we've had to use, and that's been the case right from the beginning. And I don't think anyone wants to see that, that continued anxiety caused by that. But the ones we've kept for good reasons, and it may well be the case for others that that's the choice they make too. Yeah. totally understand that, and for those in the events industry, it's one of the reasons we've had targeted support for the events industry, because it has been so difficult for them, and I totally acknowledge that. But the call we've made on outdoor facilities is based on the science, based on the evidence. We know that obviously the natural ventilation of places like these just means that the risk isn't there in the same way that an indoor event is. We will continue to monitor the situation and move to orange, a place where you have fewer restrictions, as soon as we can.
What will it take to move to orange if we maybe see some regions moving in before others?
We've always kept open the fact that different regions may be at different levels in the traffic light system. It's all about the pressure on the health system. We want to make sure that everyone gets the care they need. So it's less about cases, more about what we see in our hospitalisations, and we'll be undertaking a review in that first week of April.
So if we get a clear number of hospitalizations going down, is that going to be the indicator?
Yep, if we're hearing from primary care and our hospital network that what they're seeing is a bit more normalisation, then that'll be a big factor for us in considering what we do with those levels. Yep. Yeah.
We're starting to see Auckland's numbers go down.
Yep.
And the rest of the country, New South Wales particularly, go up. But
Yes.
then if it's a situation where Auckland's going to orange,
Yep. Yes.
how likely is that?
Look, the traffic light system does have the flexibility to have different regions at different levels without having any of those old difficulties of borders and elements like that no longer necessary. So we will consider whether some regions are in a position to move earlier than others, but the first point that we'll consider that will be in the first week of April.
I just want to ask you about gambling. Are you satisfied that our regulators in charge of overseeing gambling in New Zealand are doing their jobs effectively?
I haven't seen any evidence or reports to suggest otherwise, but if you have something that you'd like me to consider, I'd be happy to do so.
Would it surprise you then that internal affairs have done nothing about systemic issues at Sky City Casino?
Again, look, often on those matters, often operational, but if it is an issue of enforcement, happy to take a look at any issues that you may want to raise. Yeah.
Governments, do you think the public deserve more to say or should have more to say on those issues?
Well, co-governance has been around and with us and utilised in New Zealand for a number of years, and by and large has worked very successfully for us. And so I think what you see with this government is a continuation of that practice in the way that other governments have as well.
Are people getting enough of a say in it when they move towards more model?
Yes, I believe so. And look, if there are examples, happy to hear them. But yes, that would be absolutely my view. Yes, and continues to be. There's damage on, say, Highway 35, 38 and 2, which is causing inability to... It's a real concern. Tairāwhiti has on the ground at the moment the Minister who is working with the team to see when we can get those first assessments around infrastructure. There are some bridges in particular that we're concerned about. So I don't yet have an update on when we'll see some of those closures reopened. Also some concern around communication issues as well caused by power outages. So again, we'll be keeping everyone up to date. Just keep an eye, please, on the weather warnings. In the region, my understanding is that we're keeping a close eye on things over the next 48 hours. But I would, if you're local to those areas, please do take seriously the weather warnings and instructions and support that officials are providing. It is an area where I think we always want to be doing more. There are some particular areas where, for instance, the increasing deportations out of has put pressure on parts of our system. And it is an area where I think we, as a government, would want to be doing more, but we do have some limitations in the workforce there.
Minister, what kind of provisions and funding are you providing for
Often the funding and support that we put in for civil defence emergencies is as if we are able to assess the damage that's been done. Quite early days, but the Mayoral Relief Fund is always the quick to disperse support. I'll be staying in touch with the Minister, Kiri Tapualan, who's on the ground now, to see what might be needed.
Seeing that we're opening up the country, can people not visa where the countries who might be trying to come in, to put families in all these situations, can they expect to see that date moved up from October?
Well, be a number of split families who will already have been able to reconnect based on the reopening that we've already undertaken. Yeah, so even then, depending on the relationships there and their visa status, often those will have been able to reunite. But your point's right. Non-visa waiver countries currently are scheduled to be part of the reopening from October. Ministers are going to consider the ability for us to bring those dates forward, but we've not yet done that. As soon as we have announcements, we'll make them. The difference is that it's obviously much more clear-cut, a reopening arrangement for those visa waiver countries, because it's of course not contingent on our ability and scale of processing. For visa countries that require visas, of course we need to, alongside additional processing we're doing for critical workers, working holiday visas, which we've opened to, and of course the new residency program, which we've scaled up significantly. So there will be trade-offs by bringing those dates forward, and so we need to work through those. Yeah, and I'm making my last one.
How many New Zealanders are living in motels? Do you have any forecasts around, is this going to keep going into the year?
Oh, look, of course. Everyone, I think, or I would hope, would agree that what we want are long-term, sustainable, healthy housing options for all families in New Zealand. It is true that we are having to use transitional housing options, and motels have been part of that mix. Increasingly though, we're working to make sure that where we are using them, that they are suitable for often the fact that families will be in them. We've been making sure that we have the wraparound support, and that we often have the contracts for their entire facility, really manage who's in there and to make sure it's an environment that's safe. Ideally, we would not be using them at all, but I would still rather be using those facilities than have people in cars or in garages or on the street.
Why more people every year going into those facilities?
Yeah, and look, this is a question that we've asked, and we've tried to do some analysis around what we're seeing from those who are going into these forms of housing, where they're coming from. Often they're coming from private rentals. So that's why we've put a lot of work into sustaining tenancies. It's a program that we've continued to expand to try and help support people to stay in existing tenancies rather than find themselves in those more transitional arrangements. Yeah.
The government's offer of the tax funding, that's still on the table, and would you look to increase it?
Yeah, look, I'd want to get a more up-to-date breakdown of where we're at, but as far as I'm aware, nothing's changed. I know that we'd all be very eager to be hosting, to be cheering from the sidelines ourselves. Certainly, as a government, we've done our bit to try and support it being here, but these decisions aren't just down to us.
And just on Madeleine Albright,
Yeah.
do you have a tribute for her, and I guess she was seen somewhat as a leaderful woman. What is the process?
It's easy to forget the context in which Madeleine Albright took on those significant leadership roles in the international diplomatic community. It was a different time, and she really was a true statesperson and left a huge legacy. All right, thanks everyone.